From the outside, Yaman's life looked like a constant forward motion. Italy, international projects, red carpets, long shooting days, endless meetings, and a calendar that never seemed to breathe. To many, it appeared glamorous, even enviable. But behind that momentum, something quieter was happening. A shift that didn't announce itself with headlines or statements, but with choices. And the first sign was subtle. Can began spending more time in Istanbul. Not for work. Not for publicity. But for himself. Those close to him noticed the change before the media did. Italy had become a grind, not because of failure, but because of intensity. Long-term pressure, expectations to always perform at the same peak level, and the constant need to be on had started to take a toll. Can never complained publicly. He never framed it as burnout. But his decisions spoke for him. Instead of extending stays in Italy, he shortened them. Instead of adding new commitments, he paused. And when he wasn't required to be somewhere, he chose Istanbul. This wasn't a random preference. Istanbul represented something Italy no longer could in that moment. Familiarity. Control. Space. In Italy, everything around him had become structured, scheduled, and monitored. Even rest felt planned. Istanbul offered the opposite. Unplanned days. Old routines. Faces that didn't need explanations. Places that didn't expect performance. For someone who had spent years redefining himself abroad, returning home wasn't a step backward. It was recalibration. What made this decision especially interesting was its timing. Career-wise, Italy still offered momentum. New opportunities were available. Visibility remained high. Walking away, even temporarily, didn't align with the traditional logic of staying relevant. But Can's choice wasn't about visibility. It was about sustainability. And that distinction mattered. Insiders described this phase as a reset rather than a retreat. Can wasn't running from Italy. He was stepping out of a cycle that had begun to feel repetitive. Success no longer felt energizing. Istanbul allowed him to reconnect with a version of himself that existed before expectations multiplied. Fans speculated. Was this personal? Professional? An ending or a beginning? The truth was layered. This wasn't about choosing one country over another absolutely. It was about choosing balance. And Can made that choice quietly. No interviews. No explanations. Just action. That silence only deepened curiosity. Because when someone known for intensity suddenly slows down, people notice. What most didn't see yet was that this choice wasn't only about geography. It was about energy. Italy had taken a lot. Istanbul was giving something back. And as Can settled into that rhythm, another layer began to surface. Istanbul wasn't just offering rest. It was offering reconnection. As Yaman settled back into Istanbul, the contrast between his two worlds became impossible to ignore. In Italy, his days had been measured in schedules and expectations. Every hour accounted for. Every appearance calculated. Success demanded constant output. Over time, momentum became obligation. Exhaustion arrived quietly. Achievements felt routine. Those close to him described this period as quiet depletion. Not unhappiness, but emptiness. Istanbul lifted that pressure almost immediately. Not because opportunity was absent, but because demand was. No one expected him to perform. He could exist without being assessed. That freedom wasn't indulgence. It was necessary. For the first time in years, Can wasn't reacting. He was listening. This internal shift revealed something critical. Italy hadn't just affected his schedule. It had reduced his sense of control. Saying yes became automatic. Pausing felt dangerous. Istanbul allowed pause without consequence. And in that pause, fatigue became clarity. Can began questioning success itself. Was it constant presence or longevity? Visibility or sustainability? Those questions required stillness. And stillness existed only at home. Physically, the change was visible. Sleep normalized. Training became health-focused. Days slowed. But the deeper recovery was mental. Ideas resurfaced. Interests returned. Italy hadn't failed him. It had simply taken everything it could. Recognizing that removed guilt. Ken wasn't abandoning the grind. He was acknowledging its cost. Fans continued to speculate. Few understood how necessary this shift had become. Because exhaustion at that level whispers through choices. Shorter stays. Longer silences. Istanbul answered those whispers. And it wasn't temporary. This wasn't a vacation. It was a pace reset. Ken wasn't recharging to return to the same grind. He was recharging to redefine how he engaged with it. As his energy stabilized, Istanbul reconnected him. Old circles reopened. Conversations deepened. And within familiar spaces, new opportunities surfaced. Opportunities that didn't look like work. Opportunities that felt like alignment. As Ken's energy returned, the rhythm of his Istanbul days became intentional. Mornings without alarms. Evenings without agendas. Presence without planning. This wasn't nostalgia or escape. It was grounding. Istanbul reminded him how he functioned before every decision carried international consequences. People noticed the steadiness. Italy had sharpened him. Istanbul softened him. Old friendships resumed without explanation. These connections weren't transactional. They offered presence. Ken wasn't the center of attention. He was just Ken. And that mattered. It was during this phase that invitations arrived. Private gatherings. Quiet circles. Istanbul's parallel elite world. Ken wasn't a spectacle there. He was familiar. These gatherings felt like alignment, not networking. Discretion replaced exposure. One particular evening stood out. Calm. Balanced. Controlled. Power without display. This wasn't a party meant to be seen. It was meant to exist. Recharging took on deeper meaning. Not rest, but agency. Italy gave reach. Istanbul gave choice. As word spread quietly, curiosity grew among those who understood industry currents. This wasn't an intermission. It was a pivot. The elite night that followed wasn't announced or photographed. It didn't need to be. It wasn't a celebration. It was alignment. Ken's presence confirmed what many sensed. He wasn't disappearing. He was repositioning. The setting was discreet. Intentional. No spectacle. Ken arrived without performance. He listened more than he spoke. Calm replaced urgency. Italy had given visibility. Istanbul was giving leverage. This wasn't a one-off appearance. He was anchoring himself in a strategic network. No deals announced. No statements made. Yet something shifted. The choice had form. Direction. This wasn't escape. It was control. Whispers followed. But the real significance wasn't the night. It was what it represented. Ken had chosen an environment where he could move deliberately. And that choice carried consequences. Strategic ones. Stepping out of a grind doesn't mean stepping out of the game. It means changing how you play it. When the dust settled, the meaning became clear. Istanbul wasn't a pause. It was power recalibration. Italy had demanded presence. Istanbul returned authorship. Decisions became intention-driven. The elite night confirmed something internal. Sustainability over saturation. Longevity over urgency. Fewer projects. Deeper ones. Silence wasn't delay. It was filtering. Professionally, Ken restructured engagement. International work remained but no longer dominated. Privately, clarity returned. Relationships stabilized. Identity tension eased. This change wasn't for public consumption. It was for endurance. Industry insiders recognized it immediately. This wasn't retreat. It was consolidation. Power had become quieter. More selective. The contrast remained clear. Italy symbolized expansion. Istanbul symbolized control. Both had value. But control, once reclaimed, is rarely surrendered. This wasn't rejection. It was agency. Yaman didn't abandon the grind. He outgrew it. And by choosing Istanbul over Italy at that moment, he signaled readiness for a new phase defined not by speed, but by intention. After the decision settled, after the whispers faded into acceptance, a new pattern began to emerge around Yaman. It wasn't loud. It wasn't announced. But it was consistent. From Istanbul, his choices became fewer, sharper, and more deliberate. Invitations were filtered. Projects were evaluated not by scale, but by alignment. This was the phase where the real impact of choosing Istanbul over Italy became visible, not to the public at first, but to those working closest to him. People in his inner circle noticed that Ken no longer reacted to opportunity with urgency. In the past, Italy had trained him to move quickly. Momentum demanded speed. Saying yes kept the machine running. Now, speed felt optional. Time had regained value. He took longer to respond. Asked more questions. Declined without explanation. That alone signaled a shift in power. When someone stops rushing, the environment adjusts around them. This change also altered how he was perceived professionally. In Italy, he had been the reliable constant. Always available. Always present. Always delivering. In Istanbul, he became selective. And selectivity carries its own authority. Producers, collaborators, and intermediaries began to approach him differently. Conversations slowed. Expectations recalibrated. Instead of assuming access, people sought permission. That reversal didn't come from ego. It came from boundaries. What's important is that this wasn't a withdrawal from ambition. It was a refinement of it. Ken wasn't stepping away from growth. He was choosing the conditions under which growth would happen. Istanbul allowed him to anchor himself emotionally while still engaging internationally on his own terms. The city became a control room rather than a destination. From there, he could look outward without being pulled apart. This phase also brought a noticeable calm to his public presence. Fewer appearances didn't reduce interest. They increased it. Silence, when intentional, creates gravity. Fans began to read meaning into absence. Media outlets speculated, not because they were fed information, but because none was given. Ken didn't correct narratives. He didn't fuel them either. He let them exist. That restraint added depth to his image in a way constant exposure never could. Privately, this control translated into emotional stability. Without the pressure to constantly perform, Ken had space to reconnect with his instincts. Decisions felt grounded rather than reactive. He wasn't managing crises. He was shaping direction. And that shift allowed him to see his career not as a sequence of obligations, but as a long-term structure that needed maintenance, not acceleration. One of the most telling changes was how he spoke about the future. Not in public statements, but in private conversations. The language shifted from immediacy to sustainability. From next to right. From volume to value. Istanbul wasn't just where he rested. It was where he recalibrated his sense of time. And once that recalibration took hold, returning to the old grind became unthinkable. What many didn't realize was that this choice also protected him. Burnout doesn't always end careers abruptly. Sometimes it erodes them quietly. By stepping away when he did, Ken avoided that erosion. He preserved not just energy, but credibility. Because longevity isn't built on constant output. It's built on knowing when to pause. As this new phase stabilized, one final layer became clear. With control reclaimed and pace reset, Ken was no longer reacting to the industry. The industry was reacting to him. Looking back, the contrast between the two paths is striking. Had Ken Yaman remained fully immersed in the Italian grind, his trajectory would likely have continued upward in volume but downward in control. More projects. More visibility. More pressure. The kind of success that looks impressive from the outside but quietly limits choice from within. By choosing Istanbul when he did, he redirected that trajectory before it hardened into obligation. This makes one thing clear. The decision wasn't emotional. It was strategic. Italy had offered expansion. Istanbul offered consolidation. Expansion builds reach. Consolidation builds power. Ken had already achieved the first. The second required restraint. And restraint, in an industry addicted to momentum, is a form of confidence few are willing to exercise. The elite night, the quieter calendar, the selective engagement, all of it pointed to the same conclusion. Ken was no longer chasing relevance. He was curating it. And curation requires distance. Distance from noise. Distance from expectation. Distance from the idea that more is always better. Istanbul provided that distance without disconnecting him from the world. It grounded him while keeping every door open. Professionally, this repositioning ensured longevity. Fewer appearances didn't mean fewer opportunities. It meant better ones. Projects aligned with his energy, not just his image. Italy remained part of the equation, but no longer the center of gravity. That center had shifted inward. Personally, the impact was even clearer. Stability replaced tension. Clarity replaced fatigue. Identity stopped competing with schedule. Ken didn't need to announce this evolution because it wasn't designed to be consumed. It was designed to be lived. What makes this story resonate isn't the choice between two cities. It's the choice between two philosophies. Grind versus control. Exposure versus intention. Momentum versus meaning. Ken Yaman didn't reject one to embrace the other permanently. He recognized which one he needed to protect what he had built. In the end, Istanbul wasn't an escape from Italy. It was an answer to it. An answer to years of intensity, expectation, and relentless pace. By choosing to recharge where he could also recalibrate, Ken ensured that the next phase of his career wouldn't be defined by exhaustion, but by authorship. And that is the real revelation behind his choice. Not that he picked Istanbul over Italy, but that he chose himself over the grind.